All right, here we go. We are starting our last lesson for this first chapter. It's on absolute value equations, and the inequalities will come here in a day or two. That'll be your Friday assignment, actually. Then we'll get into some review next week, and we're looking at a test middle to end of next week. So today we are focusing on the first part here, right? That you can solve and graph an absolute value equation. We're not worried about the inequality part yet. Okay, so in order to solve these, we just add an extra step. You need to isolate the absolute value expression when needed, and then you're going to write it as a pair of equations or inequalities. So as a review, the absolute value tells us how far a number is from 0. So a couple examples. I skipped number 1 because 1 and 2 are exactly the same. So they wanted us to write these in words. So what do we have going on here? How do we say this? Well, we say this as the absolute value. You're going to see that written as ABS. The absolute value of D equals 5. And what two numbers could D be? What two numbers could they be? Well, you could have -5. So if you were graphing it, you put a dot, and then of course you'd have +5. Now we did number 3 to point out that you can never take the absolute value of a number and have it be negative. So this one would have no solution. Okay? Whenever we take the absolute value of a number, that answer is always positive. Whoa, we don't know what I did there. Okay, that number is always positive. So we have a +5 that lets us do this one. That one's negative. We can't do that one. So let's move on to some solving, and that says check the solutions. We'll check a couple. So if we go back up to our steps here, it says that you need to isolate the absolute value expression. Okay. So in order to isolate this, we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. And when I do that, that leaves me with the absolute value of x is equal to 6. So what does that mean? This is when we would split it. Okay? We split it, and so the absolute value of x can equal -6, or the absolute value of x can equal +6. It just adds that extra step there at the end. So it says check your solutions. Well, it's pretty simple to check, because if I plug in 6 or -6, the absolute value of those equations, of those numbers, the absolute value of those numbers is 6. Plus 5 is 11. I checked it. Here we add 7 to both sides, and that gives me 3 times the absolute value of V equals 12. No, it doesn't. Scratch that. That doesn't equal 12. It equals, I saw 5 plus 7. -5 plus 7 equals 2. Okay, so we fixed that. So it equals 2, not 12. -5 plus 7 is 2. And then I divide by 3. Divide both sides by 3. And again, we get the absolute value of V equals 2/3. Does that check? Yeah, it will. Okay, remember you have to do your additional step, because there's 2 answers to an absolute value, both the positive and its opposite. So V could equal -2/3, or V could equal a +2/3. Those will both work because the absolute value of positive or negative 2/3 is, of course, 2/3. 2/3 of 3 is 2 minus 7. You have 2 minus 7. You can get a -5. And this one, even though there's a negative here, that's okay. If we simplified this, and after you did your simplifying, then you had a negative number, that's when you would have a no solution. But in this case, once we simplified right here, I had a positive number, so I could continue the problem on. But up here, if it was negative, I couldn't. So don't just see the -5 and say, oh, no solution. Okay, and we'll go on here and do a couple more. These ones get a little trickier because up here, since the absolute value was always by itself, there was just an x inside there with the variable in the absolute value, sorry. The absolute value of x, it's all by itself. Down here, they're not. So again, our directions are to isolate the absolute value, then split it and solve. So this one's a little bit different. So after I divide by 4, now my absolute value is by itself. Now I split it, and I know that I'm going to have x plus 12 equals -6. I always put the -1 first. Or x plus 12 equals +6. So now when I subtract here, I'm doing two separate equations. Notice I'll get x equals -18, or if I subtract 12 here, x equals -6. So I could check both of these. And how does they work out? Let's see, -6 plus 12 is a +6. 6 times 4 is 24, that works. -18 plus 12 is -6. And then the absolute value of that is a +6 times 4 is 24. So it works, and you'll notice they don't match. So it's not always that simple like it was in 1 and 2. So I subtract 7 here. Kind of getting into this two-step equation stuff. And then 8 times the absolute value of h minus 6 equals 42. Divide both sides by 8. And that's going to give me the absolute value of h minus 6 equals 5, because 8 goes into 42 5 times, and how many is left over? 2 8s, which equals 1/4. So now we have to split it again. So you have h minus 6 equals a -5 1/4, or if you wanted to write 5.25, you could. Or h minus 6 equals 5 1/4. So I'll add 6, do that multiple times here. So h equals, I'm at -5 1/4, so I could put this on my calculator if I needed to. -5.25 plus 6. You're going to get your 0.75 or 3/4 if I'm sticking with fractions. Over here, my h equals 11 1/4. If I check these, I would have 3/4. So put that into my calculator. Minus 6. That equals a -5.5 1/4, or 5.25. And then I multiply that times 8. And that's going to give me the 42 that I need after I made that a positive. Add 7, get to 49. And if I put in 11 1/4 minus 6 is that same 5.25 that I need. Last one's here. This one's already done. So I split right away. 2x minus 3 equals 17. And 2x minus 3 equals negative 17. Put our or sign there because there's always going to be two answers. So add 3. 2x equals 20, divide by 2, x equals 10, or when I add 3 here, I get negative 14 after I actually add the 3. So 2x equals negative 14, divide by 2, x equals negative 7. So those are my two answers there, x equals 10 or x equals negative 7. You could check them. 10 times 2 is 20, minus 3 is 17, absolute value of 17 is 17. Negative 7 times 2 is negative 14, minus 3 is negative 17. Again, the absolute value of negative 17 is positive 17. Last one for the day. Subtract 8 from both sides. That gives me 3 times the absolute value of 5 minus n equals negative 4. Then I divide by 3. And what you're going to notice here is that the absolute value of 5 minus n equals negative 4/3. I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. There is our second example of a negative. I have a negative 4/3. I can't take the absolute value of something and end up with a negative number. So you cannot find a solution that works for that. And really, the reason this doesn't work is because this 8 is bigger than this 4. So you're always going to be adding 8. And over here, we have no negatives. So you're always going to be adding 8 to a positive number. And that 8's always going to end up being bigger than 4. So there's going to be a worksheet uploaded. Take your time on it and get it uploaded, showing all your steps. Okay? And that is it for today.